You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare. The Children's Rights Alliance for England says disciplining young children with a smack is a breach of a UN treaty which outlaws any form of violence against children. Meanwhile, the Justice Secretary, Chris Grayling, has defended a parent's right to smack their child, saying it gives children a message. Joining me to discuss whether parents should be allowed to smack their children is Mary Crowley, President of the International Federation for Parenting Education, Peter Cuthbertson, Director for the Centre for Crime Prevention, UK Independence Party member Stephen Woolfe, who is also a barrister and who supports a parent's right to smack their child, and Pat Gordon-Smith, campaigner with the Children Are Unbeatable Alliance. So, should parents be allowed by law to smack their child? Mary Crowley.
No. Most parents actually feel quite upset when they smack their children. They do it when they're driven to the sort of edge of tolerance, and they feel bad because it's quite often a product of when parents are going through a hard time. My parents worrying about money, about too much work, not enough time, about their own relationships. None of this is the children's fault, but the children, apparently refuse to do as they're told. And the children smack them. I mean, when I managed staff, if they didn't do as they were told, I didn't hit them. I talked to them. And that's what we should do with children. Slowly explain to them what the problem is. As I say, lack of time can often be a major factor, that parents are in a hurry. But actually, it's well worth the investment, because we know from research that children actually don't half the time know why they've been smacked. So one ends up smacking them again for the same thing. It would be much, much better to take time, talk to them, explain what they've been doing wrong and why it's not okay. And then give them a little cuddle and tell them, they can't have their favourite tea or tea time treat or whatever, but not hitting them. It's assault. Why would you hit a child? They're smaller than you. I wouldn't hit a smaller person here. I don't think it's okay to hit a child. And it's not the child's fault. It's just, it's an abuse of power because we're bigger. We always notice that parents stop hitting them when they're about 15 or 16 and bigger than them.
You mentioned at the very beginning there, though, it's always the parents who are at their last tether. Yeah. And that what drives them to hit or smack their child. Should they be criticised for hitting their child if at that moment they thought it was the right thing to do?
It's not so much that they think it's the right thing to do, is it really, Juliet? It's because they don't think very much. They're feeling way out of control. And it's not okay, for example, to hit adults that I disagree with. If I go to the greengrocer's and discover that what I'd hoped to buy was twice the price, I don't consider hitting the greengrocer. I talk to him about it. So it's just that it's bad to know that it's not against the law to hit my children.
OK, Peter, then, you're the director for the Centre for Crime Prevention. Should there be a law banning parents categorically from smacking their children, or is there a common sense approach that you believe needs to continue?
I think we already have a common sense approach. The law currently states that where scratches or bruises appear on the child, then the law's been broken. So it's already very stringent. I think it's dangerous to go further than that and suggest that every smack in every case should be something the police should investigate. I look at this very much from the point of view of the police themselves, who have to deal with millions of reported crimes every year. It's their time spent dealing with this that will be time taken away from much more serious offences, from burglary, from murders, from muggings. I think it would be a terrible waste of time. I don't agree either that you can draw complete analogies between how you treat adults and children. I think we often in society just go wrong by treating adults like children and treating children like adults. I think in this case there are some children, in some cases, who respond well to reasoning and to being talked to, and that is a good thing, and that's something to be encouraged. I think other children, in other cases, especially younger children who are just too young to understand what they've done wrong, in that case it may be necessary to smack them.
OK, is there ever a moment then, Pat, you're from the Children Are Unbeatable Alliance, that a parent should be allowed to smack their child?
No, I don't think it makes any sense for a parent to be able to smack their child. There are so many other ways of coping with difficult situations. I mean, as Mary has said, you talk to children. Sometimes, if you can't talk to children, maybe you just leave the situation until you as a parent have been able to calm down. I mean, I've certainly felt that in the past. Just leave it, come back to it, deal with it a little bit later. If you have a child in danger, a lot of people will say that they need to smack their child to stop them running out into the street. And I mean, I completely understand why people feel that sense of panic, but you don't protect somebody by hitting them. Effectively, I think that there's quite a lot of research has shown that it's a parent's voice and a parent's actions. So if you're looking panicked, if you're looking worried, if you pull a child out of the road, you've actually shown them that it is a scary and dangerous thing to do just by that action, by the panic in your voice. And a child may not learn immediately, sometimes it does take a little while. But to a certain extent, if you have our children are learning everything. You would never, ever suggest that a child who's learning to write, and that takes years, should be smacked along the way because they don't get it right. And really, we seem to expect children to learn how to behave safely, and to learn how to behave well in what is incredibly complicated social circumstance. We're very complicated creatures, human beings, and our society is very complicated. And yet we seem to expect children to understand how to behave well immediately. And so I think we have to learn to behave differently ourselves and to give children time and absolutely not to use violence or even the threat of violence as a way of trying to explain to children what they need to do.
Stephen Woolfe, just to bring you into the discussion here, do you think in any way that Justice Secretary Chris Grayling was right in that when he defended the parents' right to smack their children?
I would like to begin that I think that Chris Grayling took the correct approach in this time because he's attempting to be sensible. He's attempting to balance the difficulties that human beings have in their relationships with one another and also the balance that parents have with their children. What we have found so far, particularly since the 1960s and the 70s, when there became a culture sweeping across the kind of Anglosphere, where anybody who did a psychology degree or went off and did social studies came up with some fanciful book learning ideas, that's the way to do it because I've done it by a piece of research. I've done it because I was at university. And what often that happened was that those people failed to understand human nature. Now, what I would agree with Mary and to the extent Pat is, of course, that parents don't want to hit their children. It's not in their natural interests to do so. They don't want to see their child in pain. And, of course, we'd also like to talk to them, explain them how they should act in situations where they're concerned, like crossing the road. But once again, that goes down to theory. And it goes again to those who've done their PhDs who do not realize the difficulties that parents have and miss one fundamental problem. Children are not always never to blame. Children do know what they are doing. They do know when to push their parents to the edge. And they do know that it's sometimes wrong to do actions that they take. The law accepts that, parents accept that, and common sense accepts that. And that's why sometimes you have to go to the extreme, where a mild smack, or even indeed a shake, which is sometimes, like Pat was suggesting, when you're pulling them out of the road. That's the same equivalent in many cases, because that in some countries could actually deem to be breaking the law.
Well, you're both shaking your head. Mary, what would your response be to Stephen then? He said that a sensible approach, a smack is fine. And perhaps there is too much theorising of why you shouldn't smack your children and what parents should be doing now.
But parents themselves tell us that they feel bad afterwards, actually, that they, most times, there's very little calculated hitting of children, count down to the hit. It's most often it's somebody, loses their temper or is just at the end of their tether and hits a child. But parents just snapping and hitting a child, they tell us afterwards that they feel bad because they knew in most cases it was more to do with how they were feeling. When, as I say, they're worried about money, they're worried about their health, they're feeling overworked, and, they just snap, really. But we know also that children do, to a certain extent, understand that. But it does help if I say what I would say to somebody I love, an adult. I'm sorry, I lost it. Yes, you shouldn't have eaten the last of the trifle, but nevertheless, I shouldn't have hit you, and I'm sorry. but, next time, remember, check with me before you finish the food in the fridge or whatever it is the child has done wrong. But not hit them. And as I say, if a parent loses it, then they apologise. And why is it that the law says we can't hit adults, but we can hit a small child? There's something weird about that.
The law makes it absolutely clear that in certain circumstances, if you feel in fear, if there is an attack on yourself, whether verbal or you fear that your life may be in danger, then you may attack an adult. So there are circumstances under the law that actually allows that, Mary.
Now, poor Steve,
you can't simply, if you're trying to say I can walk down the street and hit anybody on the street, then you are correct. But you cannot say there are no circumstances in the law where it's not allowed to hit another adult. It is not true, and the law is there to protect adults as well as children.
Aren't you worried about poor Peter here, Stephen? Maybe if he disagrees with me strongly enough, I might be tempted to hit him if it's okay.
No, well, that's a different circumstance altogether. That's not a question of where an assault. And if you want to go out and physically violate someone's person because you disagree with them, then the law also protects you for doing that.
Good.
And we have also social circumstances where we've grown up over a period of thousands of years where we've actually agreed where those social circumstances are that you can have a discussion without hitting someone, and you have social approbation. Those same social circumstances grow up in the way that we dealt with children, and we've now got a fine balance, a balance which is difficult for many parents because the law is not very clear, but certainly we've got a balance where we recognise that sometimes that is a possibility and you shouldn't be criminalised for it.
Is there something missing in society that parents feel they need to be supported, that you mentioned, Mary, that they lose it? So are we focusing too much then on the physical violence towards children as opposed to sort of focusing maybe on a structure to help parents or a support line for parents?
Absolutely. It's hard to believe. I remember taking my first child home from hospital and thinking, are they seriously giving me this kid to take home? Do they have any idea how incompetent I am? I was a new mother. I was 24. I actually was the eldest of 4 children, but I still felt completely incompetent. We should be helping parents to prepare for having children and giving them help and support and parenting education along the way. It's the most difficult and most important job we do, and we get no training, no pay, no holidays, no support.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Juliet Spare. And we're discussing whether parents should be allowed by law, as they are in the UK, to smack their child. With me to discuss the matter is Mary Crowley, President of the International Federation for Parenting Education. Pat Gordon-Smith, a campaigner with the Children Are Unbeatable Alliance. Stephen Woolfe, a barrister and City of London spokesperson for the UK Independence Party. And Peter Cuthbertson, Director for the Centre for Crime Prevention. Peter.
I'm quite worrying just how often you want to second-guess parents in everything you're saying. I think it's the way you talk about it always being parents at the end of their tether, as if that's where it happens. I think it's forgetting just how often it's the parents who care, who are putting the time into disciplining their children. The worst parents, those who never punish them in whatever way. They're not thinking about the consequences of their children's behaviour. They're not taking the time to do it. I think, in particular as well, what you say could be used to argue against parents choosing to do that, but again, to use the government, to use legislation to give people a criminal record for doing it, that's another step altogether, and it's so much more, a much stronger step that would cause all sorts of ramifications. I mean, do you think you'd be helping children who've been smacked if you give their parents a criminal record? Do you think any children who have been smacked would want that?
I'd like to step in here and say that I don't think there's anybody who supports a ban on corporal punishment who would want to see more parents imprisoned. What we're looking for is a change in the law that would recognise that people's lives are complicated, and which would do very much what all our laws on violence towards each other do, is they recognise that not every act of violence needs to be reported to the police. Not every act needs to be acted upon, and we have that in law already. There's plenty of protection of people in that way, and it would apply in exactly the same way to hitting children. What we need this law to do is to make it abundantly clear that it is not acceptable to have one section of our society where there is a defence in law that makes it acceptable for these people to be hit. It's just not acceptable that they should be more vulnerable to any form of violence than anybody else, especially as they are smaller, and especially as the vast majority of children who do suffer physical punishment are those who have least access to representation. They are age 4 and under.
So that's a very confused message in law that you're trying to suggest, Pat. On the one hand, you're saying there are a position in law that exists at the moment.
Yes, it's called the de minimis principle.
If we are hitting children, there is a law. It's called assault. There's also battery if you go more serious. Yes. But you therefore say we must be able to ensure that parents have circumstances where they don't go into prison. It's exactly that balance, which is why English common law has a very clear view that you allowed mild force as the defence if it's reasonable, and it's slightly less than that of assault. If you remove that out of the way completely, then the only law that's left is to go up to the level of assault, which is quite a serious offence.
But what you're talking about is the different levels of assault. What I am talking about is the fact that children have a right not to be hit, for there not to be levels of assault, for it to be entirely outlawed altogether, in exactly the same way as it is outlawed. Nobody may hit me. They may not do that. My husband may not do it. My children may not do it. Nobody may do it. And it should be exactly the same for children. Now, if you have a barroom brawl, okay, there are lots of barroom brawls. Not every single one of those barroom brawls will end up with men going into the police station. They just don't. And exactly the same thing would happen if it was illegal to hit all children. There has to be an element of, as you would say, common sense about how far criminalisation would go. And that would be built into a good law. But what we need to do is to send a message that it is absolutely unacceptable for anybody to hit anybody else, and that includes children.
Peter, how can a law recognise lives are complicated?
I find the suggestion very worrying. It's sort of, on the one hand, that we need to send out a very clear message using the law against smacking. On the other, that it shouldn't be enforced in all kinds of cases. I think that would create huge confusion.
That's exactly how the law happens, generally, on
violence. You don't want parents to go to prison for smacking. I think that ignores the fact that a criminal record can cause huge damage to respectable people, whether they go to prison or not. It means that every time they apply for a job, their prospective employer will see that and will assume the worst. It does huge harm to the children themselves. I think the other thing I'd say is I find what both you and Mary are saying has no recognition of the role of the family, of any sort of distinction between the role that parents have in overseeing children, looking after them and bringing them up, and any other relationship in society. I think that's a very dangerous thing to ignore. I think that the language of giving children more and more rights to be used against their parents, and that principle is not a good one for the family.
Children don't want to take their parents to prison or anything like that. Parents are the most important people in children's lives. Yes. Not only are they completely dependent on them, but they love them more than anyone else. So, there's no question of children wanting their parents put in jail or something like that. But, I feel we're in a different place now than we were even 50 years ago. It's not that long ago that the banning of hitting women has come in. It was okay to hit your wife if she was annoying you up until fairly recently. That's not okay now. And I think also very often we have fewer children now. People are not as desperate as in such difficult circumstances as they were in the past, perhaps, when they couldn't take as much time to talk to their children. My mother-in-law had 10, of whom 9 lived. And that's very, very difficult to deal with such a large family. I'm not saying that makes it okay to hit the children, but it certainly makes for a tenser atmosphere, especially when money is short. Very often now we have 2 or 3 children, and we actually have time to talk to them and have a relationship with them. And that's what the children want. The other thing that is very sad is that children, when they were asked, found, in most cases, didn't know why they'd been hit. So far from it being a deterrent for the future, for bad behaviour, actually they didn't know. They just know that the people who were the most important in the world to them and on whom they're completely dependent assaulted them, hit them. And they just feel sad. It's quite bad for you. And Stephen may cast aspersions on psychologists, but there is a lot of mental ill health in society. I'm not saying all of it comes from hitting children, but violence is certainly a factor.
One is schizophrenic, and I've had to live with mental health for nearly 17 years. I'm perfectly well aware of the effects of mental health and the drugs that go with them. I've also been involved in charities. That isn't the point. There is a separate point here that actually deeply concerns me about the current level of, in many ways, the views that are being pushed in terms of giving rights to children. It's an absolute statist argument. It's also quite concerning that the governments themselves know best over the family. And we're seeing this across a whole spectrum of legislation that's sweeping through Europe and across the United States. And most of it has stemmed itself from what I now begin to call the kind of Oxford psychologists and the love and smoking pot group that enjoyed themselves in the 60s, who seem to have not really come out and grown up. There is a modern world out there where people have to deal with supreme difficulties in their family lives, in their work lives. And all we seem to be saying is the state knows best. And that's what concerns me the most. We will tell you how to run your lives, and if you step over it, then we will come down on you like a ton of bricks. There is no balance, and this is one of those continual arguments where there is no balance.
So you're saying the law would replace common sense, Stephen?
We're seeing it all the time. And we're seeing it in many pieces of legislation. Common law has grown up in this country in a very fine legal system that we have, that we've exported into many countries, and we still do so today when we're going into places like Afghanistan and Libya. They're trying to look at those legal systems that we've implemented. Indeed, I've worked on positions in Romania where I tried to put similar types of law in the pre-EU days. And what they've liked is the way that we managed to balance. What we're seeing now is a different type of corporate legal mentality where they're trying to put the state instead of common sense. And that I disagree with.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Juliet Spare, and I'm joined by Mary Crowley, President of the International Federation for Parenting Education, member of the UK Independence Party, Stephen Woolfe, Peter Cuthbertson, Director for the Centre for Crime Prevention, and Pat Gordon-Smith, campaigner with the Children Are Unbeatable Alliance.
Opinions change. We move with the times. And increasingly, I think we are beginning to understand that children don't have enough of a voice. We have to speak for them. And we, therefore, have to recognise where, perhaps, the law as it stands, the current status quo, is not fair to them, and we need to do something about it.
And when you say we're changing, is that then the reference to perhaps going along more theories that are presented by child psychologists, or reading more books about the behaviour of children to learn about them because they are too young to communicate what they think?
It's almost legislation by behaviourologists. And that is actually a deeply concerning, and anyone who's read either George Orwell or Aldous Huxley can see where the world will go if we have to just take the word of experts in a particular area all the time. And experts themselves that actually over a period of time fall out of favour and actually eventually become the opposite of what people believe because things have moved on. Unfortunately, if you just take it by a vogue, and that's how you deal legislation, we may as well throw democracy out the window right away. And a very clear example about that, Mary at the beginning suggested, and it's true, that parents do lose their tether because of the circumstances they're in. But if you take the example of a child that was about to cross the road and its parent grabbed its arm very forcefully, leaving a mark and a bruise, and then because she was deeply concerned, but because she might have lost her child, emotionally shouted and screamed at that child, and we had a case in Portugal very similar to that recently, then you have a situation where that parent could actually be deemed, under the law, to have actually assaulted that child.
What, by shouting at them?
That's the circumstances where you can't have it. So you have to have a balance.
The law doesn't say you can't shout at your children, nor should it. I mean, it's not to be recommended, but that level of legislation is untenable. That's not what we're asking for. We're asking that they not hit them.
That's where you have the very fine line.
Oh.
You're saying it here in a nice intellectual debate that that's not what we're asking for. But the reality of law is that when these cases are brought to it, people can do and bring cases of people like this to the courts, not what you may well have intended, but the law of unintended consequences always ends up in court with cases where they shouldn't be there. Don't change it just because you feel on a whim it should.
But there's a difference between physical assault and attacking somebody verbally. I mean, I've been disagreeing with Peter here, but I haven't actually reached across and hit him. He'd be quite surprised if I did. And in fact, he would be defended by the law. So we're not talking about what we're focusing on today is forbidding parents from physically assaulting their children. And as I say, most parents would actually like a bit of help in moving to different ways. And what they say when they come to parenting education, which is not at all the formulaic intervention that you think it is, I recommend it. You should try it. It is helping. You've seen it. Have you taken part in it? Have you got children?
My first coming up, and actually I went to a couple and I thought to myself, this is just Islington fancifulness.
Congratulations. Was it preparation for birth or was it parenting education?
It's preparation for birth.
Different thing altogether. That's physical.
I take the words of my aunt and uncles and mother who have much more significant experience of bringing up children than those that I found there. I almost thought I was going to laugh myself off. Because really, it was something as though it was in Alice in Wonderland, half the things that they were talking about.
Well, preparation for birth is for the physical giving birth. It's not the same thing at all. It's preparation for a lifelong relationship with children is what parenting education is. And it's got a lot to do with how I'm feeling at the time and my relationship with my partner and worrying about things. And these are the things that impact on our bringing up our children.
It's incredibly middle class and very insulting to the
Not at all.
class.
Not at all. I ran classes for 20 years in Waltham Forest, which is a very poor borough, as I'm sure you know.
Absolutely.
And they were extremely popular with poor parents, parents from minority ethnic groups, parents who were struggling financially, frankly. And they said, as I felt myself when I first went on a parenting course, I wish somebody had told me this before. Because we're given this incredibly difficult job and no training and no support. It's a pity because we're all doing the best job we can at the time and we all want to do our best. There isn't a parent in the world who looks at their tiny baby and thinks, I'm going to fix you, kid. Not a bit of it. We are determined to do our very best. But it's very difficult because we're affected by how we were brought up and we actually welcome new insights and new ways of doing things which will make our children happier and grow up more successful. That's all every parent wants.
Peter, what would your response be to Mary then to say that, parents need more assistance? It's, I know you don't believe they should be criminalised, but in this instance they would be if there was an outright law on smacking.
I just don't think assistance deals with this debate. I think it only makes sense what you're saying if you start out from the assumption that parents who smack children are always in the wrong and the children are always in the right. I just think that's unreal. It's not the world we live in. If children always behaved well and always responded to reason, then I would have a lot of sympathy with what you're saying and with these proposals to change the law. I just don't believe that's the case.
Childline says that 20,000 children call in to them in regard with physical punishment and abuse. Now, most of the children who call into our Childline are aged over 8. And most of the children who are hit by their parents are aged 4 and under. So that tells you that actually what we don't know is how many very young children are being hurt regularly, feeling as if they can't just be talked through a problem.
Is there a line for mums?
There are 2 websites and helplines for mums, NetMums and Mumsnet. Funnily enough, there are their names.
I'd like to thank all my guests, member of UKIP, Stephen Woolfe, Peter Cuthbertson, Director for the Centre of Crime Prevention, Pat Gordon-Smith, campaigner with the Children Are Unbeatable, and Mary Crowley, President of the International Federation for Parenting Education.